Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Stories program. On the program today, we have Darlene McDonald. She is the Racial Equality in Policing. She's serving on this commission that the Salt Lake City Police Department's putting together to have better treatment for people who are basically being arrested or detained. I'm really interested in that because we've been covering police issues and police malpractice in Utah Stories, and there's been some blatant examples in Salt Lake City. And I think one of the best things that have come out of what's happened of late is that we are finally taking a very close look at how we can do policing in a better manner, and she's going to talk all about that today. We're also going to go into, she's a black woman in Utah. She's serving on the Democratic National Committee for Utah, and we're going to talk about what it's like to be a Democrat in Utah. It's kind of like a rare person who we have, because we now have a second person running for Congress, Burgess Owens, who's going to be running against Ben McAdams, who's also running as a Republican. It seems like we have plenty of Republicans and very few Democrats, and so we want to give everyone a voice. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about Canyon Meadows grass-fed beef. If you haven't tried pasture-raised beef yet, you absolutely need to try Canyon Meadows. Their ranch is located in eastern Utah in beautiful Altamont. I visited it. It's an incredible place. You can't believe you're in Utah. It's just this thick, rich, lush pastures. The cows are super happy. They live on pastures their entire life. So if you visit cmrbeef.com, you can stock up on ground beef, roasts, and steaks. They have pickup locations throughout Salt Lake City. And if you don't know the difference between factory farm beef and pasture-raised beef, you actually just need to taste the difference. You'll immediately notice the flavor. It's just far more flavorful. It's way better for you. You can get your own package of steaks, ribs, ground beef, or roasts. I've personally used Canyon Meadows for years as my supplier for all my backyard barbecues, and I'm never going back to factory farm beef. It's just too good. I'm consistently blown away with how tender and delicious their meat is. Visit their site right now, and you'll get a special offer if you use offer code UT Stories. Just go visit cmrbeef.com and put that offer code in. It's good for the earth, good for you, and delicious flavor. All right, Darlene, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Hello, Tyler. Thank you very much for having me on.
I'm Richard. Tyler's our audio engineer, but yeah, thanks for being on. So we're finally seeing police reform happen in Salt Lake City. Tell us, so what kind of input have you been giving them, and what kind of recommendations do you think you'll be passing down to the way our police changes in Utah and in Salt Lake in particular?
Well, again, thank you for having me on. We do have a structure with the Racial Equity in Policing Commission that I can tell you about. So there are 6 core members that were selected for the commission. And how we decided to structure it, we don't have there isn't a leadership, so we don't have a chair of the commission or anyone. There's no set hierarchy. We're still in the formation stages, so we just appointed 13 additional commissioners that we brought on that will also provide their voice and input as we move forward with recommendations to changes for policing in Salt Lake City. And that's what we're going to be doing. We're tasked with this for about a year. And so we'll be meeting, and like I said, we're still in the formation stage right now, setting everything up, getting the ground rules of how we're going to look and be very transparent with the community, the activists as well, so that they know that we are serious about police reform. And it's also very important that they know that we hear them and we understand the necessity and we agree with the necessity for police reform.
Yeah.
So each one of the core members have different views, but we haven't sat down and discussed all of that yet. We are still in the formation stage.
So was your group tasked by the mayor or by the city council, or how did your group come about?
I'm going to say by the mayor and the council. I believe they work together,
Mm-hmm.
and we have the full support of the mayor office as well as the city council. But we also have independents from both of them as well. So we are leading this charge. They're not overseeing what we're doing and like you must do this or you must do that. We are independent.
What can you say even now what some of your recommendations will likely be?
I could say one of the things that will probably be top of mind is um, well, we are going to discuss over policing in communities of color and police force that is used in policing as well. So those are the two things that we are going to be looking at as well. When to use force, when not to use force. Just because you have the ability to doesn't necessarily mean you should.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that we're going to be looking at. And other things as well, we're going to probably look into hiring practices. Who is actually being hired by the police department? We might look at some of the education certification that goes into it. So we're going to ask for input from the community. It's going to be transparent. Like I said, it's going to be open meetings as well. So once we get started, the community does have an opportunity to voice their concerns and also give whatever type of input or recommendations they may have.
Yeah, when you talk about over policing, that's an issue that it seems to be a real sticking point because when you look at what's happened in New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio basically just told the police force there, um, stand down. Let's just stop this over policing, and then let's look at how we can reform our police department. Immediately, I think it was 500 police officers went into early retirement. The police there are really put into a bad position, and now we're seeing more and more murders happening in New York than we've seen in decades. How do you effectively eliminate over policing and not increase the crime and the murder rate in a city?
You have to look at the underlying factors. I'm not going to say that there's a correlation between the two because I haven't looked at it. I don't know. Causation isn't necessarily correlation or vice versa, but you have to look at all of it. What is we're also in the middle of a pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
and you have people who are no longer working, and there are so many factors that are happening right now that are impacting how people are feeling alongside what's happening in the communities with what happened with Mr. George Floyd and the protest movement. So there's a lot that need to be looked at before we can say, oh, just because 500 police officers walked out, then all of a sudden we have an increase in murders. That we don't know that until we actually look at what's going on. And I haven't looked at that in depth yet,
Okay.
but I will. But I will definitely. With most people, when we talk about over policing, we're talking about how police departments police communities of color versus everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm walking down the street, I mean, just look at the stop and frisk. And stop and frisk was found to not be effective at all. But if you were a person of color, particularly a Black man or a Hispanic man, you were pulled over, you were asked, why are you here? You were frisked. You were over policed.
Yeah.
Many times, yeah. And that's what happened in New York and in other cities as well that implemented that program. That's what we mean about over policing. But it was also found to not have been effective at all. It didn't lead to a decrease of crime at all. So those are the things that need to be and must be looked at.
Yeah, I definitely agree that like racial profiling, and the way that really black or white, depending on how you're dressed, will
Mm-hmm.
determine whether or not the police will stop you and be suspicious of what's going on with what you're doing. But I mean I look at the basic statistics of police and safety, and I'm not talking about over policing, but it's really the places where the police presence is large enough to really be a real deterrent against crime, where you see the highest property values and people want to basically live. And I just don't see how you can maintain the safety for the populations absent a a uh, a big police force, especially in the most dangerous communities. Do you see a way in which they can reduce crime and keep people safe without the police presence? Do you think there's a solution there?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And those are some of the things that I will bring forth as part of the police commission in what some of the conversations that I would like to have. Because having an overabundance of police isn't necessarily is what's going to bring down the crime. Chicago has a lot of police. What's happening in Chicago, what's happening in a lot of cities, St. Louis, for instance, the problem isn't that they don't have enough police officers. No one will say that there is not enough police officers in any of these cities. But you also have high poverty rate. You also have a lack of jobs. You have inequality in education. You have lack of training, jobs training. You have lack of mental health care and mental health services. You have people that are hungry. You have people who maybe have a criminal past or some sort of police record that's preventing them from getting jobs. There's a lot of things that need to be looked at rather than saying we need an increase in police officers and that's going to solve the problem, because it's not solving the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you get into the conversation about the defund the police. As a name, I hate it, but as a meaning, I understand it. And what you're talking about is what you're talking about are the underlying causes that require a presence. Right now, it requires a presence of law enforcement. But if someone makes a phone call to law enforcement, but they're actually experiencing a mental health crisis, maybe it isn't law enforcement that needs to be getting that telephone call.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a social worker that should be getting that phone call. Domestic violence cases, that's something entirely different, because unfortunately, those tend to lead to violent situations, and unfortunately, many women end up dead in those situations. So the domestic violence may require law enforcement, but a mental health crisis may not require law enforcement. So these are the things that we need to look at more closely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. I think we have a mental health crisis in this country right now, and it's only getting worse as the pandemic stretches on. One statistic I've repeated a couple times is for every 1% increase in unemployment, there's a 4% increase in deaths from suicide, overdose, and depression. And so this is only going to get worse before it gets better. And so is one of the recommendations here in Salt Lake and maybe across the country to get more skilled counselors out into the communities to replace police officers? Is that what they're talking about?
Those are the things that many people are talking about. Having more, and people are laughing about it, but having more social services and social workers and psychologists, or at least access to mental health care. I mean, that is a big part of this issue. The decriminalization of homelessness. I mean, homelessness should not be criminalized. You shouldn't call the police because there's a homeless person asleep on your front lawn. Maybe, that's another type of phone call. How to minimize and decrease the presence in the instance of law enforcement will most likely decrease a lot of the cases that we see, the George Floyd instances, or something like that, where maybe it's not law enforcement you need to be calling. Maybe it is a social worker or someone that's going to come and blue sheet this person rather than having law enforcement coming with a finger on the trigger. I mean, that's what we're trying to minimize.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about homelessness and the Black Lives Matter movement. But before we get to that, I need to give you a message from our sponsor. The Utah Stories Show is brought to you in part by the Carpet Barn. The Carpet Barn is located in South Salt Lake. They've been in the carpet business for over 40 years. Their staff is friendly and helpful. They have a huge selection of carpet. And if you're looking to save a lot of money, they have truly awesome carpet for the price, much better than big box prices. Go check them out in South Salt Lake. Google them, the Carpet Barn. Tell them you found out about them on the Utah Stories Show, and that would be a big bonus for us. They've been an awesome supporter of Utah Stories for many years, and they're a really great family-owned business. So yeah, we've done a lot on homeless issues. It's a really difficult topic because what I've seen happen, in particular in places like Main Street in downtown Salt Lake City, is that I've seen businesses open up on Main Street in an area where they have like really nice overhangs which provide shade throughout the day, where it's really helpful for homeless people to hang out there. But then as soon as you come out of these particular businesses, you'll get accosted by homeless people asking for money. And I'm always for helping homeless people, but I'm not for panhandling, because usually when you just hand a homeless person a $20 bill, that's going to be used for drugs and alcohol, whereas opposed if you go buy them a lunch, that's a much better method. But my point is, I understand homeless rights, and homeless people need a place to be and a place to stay, but when it really impacts the ability of a small business owner to keep their customers and stay in business, how do you draw that line, and where do you find that balance?
Well, first of all, I have to see the studies that say that they're going to automatically go and buy drugs or alcohol. Some, maybe not all. Some may actually be buying food.
I know some do, and I really,
yeah.
I mean, you can kind of tell by looking at the particular homeless person, I think, but whatever.
And unfortunately, many of them are veterans, and goes back to what we were speaking about with mental health care. And many of them are suffering from PTSD from too many deployments. So again, we're talking about mental health care. And also, drug addiction is not a crime. That's, again, go back to treatment programs. That, again, goes back to we're not putting money into the services that we need to be putting the money into. Having an addiction is not a crime. It shouldn't require law enforcement. It should allow people to get treatment. So let's put some resources so that we don't have panhandlers who asking for money to go buy drugs. Mm-hmm. And if they are buying drugs, then let's address those issues. And there's some very progressive things out there that we could be doing. I know that one of our state legislators, Jen Daly Provost, Representative Jen Daly Provost, had put forth a bill of having basically a safe house where addicts can shoot up in a safe house but get treatment at the same time. I believe something of that nature was done, maybe Sweden or Switzerland, one of those countries,
Amsterdam.
successfully.
I visited that country.
Well,
They definitely have that available.
yeah. I mean, most people are not going to go for that, but that's a very progressive change where you're not criminalizing addiction, but you're giving them help and making it safe at the same time. And most likely will lead to someone getting off of the drugs rather than tossing them out on the streets, which is not humane at all. So there are very humane ways that we could deal with these issues. And now back to the point about the homelessness in downtown. Well, one of the biggest causes of homelessness is high rent, and people just can't afford to live anywhere. We have one of our success stories recently, Rico's. I love Rico's. I make tacos at home, and I buy Rico's, and I put Rico's products on my tacos when I make it at home, and may be forced to go out of business because they can no longer afford the rent in the warehouse where they have. This is one of the biggest drivers of homelessness, is not being able to afford the rent. I believe someone has to work 70 something hours in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Salt Lake City. That is ridiculous. I mean, addressing the cost of renting and living here in Salt Lake City and around the country. This is not an issue that is isolated to Salt Lake City. This is a nationwide issue.
Yeah.
The high cost of living and affording the rent. So yeah, let's look at the tiny homes. We had started actually looking at that at one point. Look at tiny homes and how we can convert maybe some of these empty plots that are just going to waste. Maybe put some trailers on there that we can turn into tiny homes for homeless people.
Yeah, we pointed out how an exurb in Houston was basically allowing a zoning change for tiny homes, and then they incorporated a garden area where people could get jobs working for this urban garden. And that seems like significant change, because the biggest problem with housing, I don't think, is a lack of government subsidies. It's just a lack of zoning. It's just like the zoning laws don't allow apartment buildings to be high enough, so we don't have enough density. We don't have enough inexpensive housing available. Whereas if you just allowed some of these wide open expanses of space that are in Salt Lake County and West Valley to be zoned a little differently, people could go in and put in a trailer, put in a tiny home, and find affordable housing that way. And yeah, I agree with you completely on that. Yes. I just think that we had Greg Hughes on the program a while back. He was running for governor, and we addressed Operation Rio Grande, where they basically bulldozed the homeless out of Pioneer Park, and it wasn't at all a humane response to the problem. And cities like Seattle and Portland had this much more humane, much more dignified treatments of their homeless people. But the problem, it seems, on a national level, is that the more the police stand down and the more rights you give and the more handouts you give, the homeless population, they're mobile, they move to these places, they show up, and unfortunately a lot of them, according to a lot of the people I spoke to, actual homeless people on the streets in Salt Lake City, a lot of them aren't looking for jobs. They're looking for, where can I get the best sort of benefits and handouts so that I don't have to go work at a place like Walmart. And I didn't find any kind of solution to that problem in what I've heard about.
Well, again, I would have to look at the data that you're looking at, because when you have someone, the biggest drivers of homelessness, as we talked about, is lack of affordable housing, but it's also mental health care. And if you have someone that is suffering from mental health situations, mental health crisis, they're not particularly going to look for a job because they need to address the underlying issue, the mental health issue that they may have.
Yeah,
and then you can go from there. Yeah, so most people most people want to be productive and feel good about themselves and their lives and their families and go from there. Are people on the opposite end of that, but the vast majority of people want to do good. And I really strongly believe that. Want to do good for themselves and want to do good for other people. They may have issues that are preventing them from being their best selves. And unfortunately, a lot of what's driving that are mental health issues. And we can address that. And as we're addressing that, let's address the affordable housing situation. Let's address even people's past. How can we get people to a position where if you're looking at their past, and if maybe they do have a criminal past, maybe they made a mistake when they were 18, 19, 20 years old, that's going to follow them for the rest of their lives and prevent them from getting not only a job, but also prevents them from even getting federal student loans to even go back to school. So we're tying their hands so many different ways, and we're pushing people into a life of either a criminal life or what we would say a black market life, or we're putting people out on the streets. So there are a lot of ways that we can reform the system so that we can invite people back into it and not lock people out of it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I followed around a homeless guy by the name of Ben 2 years ago, and he had MRSA all over his legs from staying in the homeless shelter. He suffered from bipolar. He couldn't get the meds right. He couldn't get it. He's just like, I can't get a job. Look at me. And he looked terrible, and he was a really awesome kid, and he let me follow him around for a while. But he said, I'm not on the right meds. I look terrible. I've basically told my parents, just, let me deal with my bipolar in my way, which is using heroin. And he just said, all I want to do is just take it one day at a time and live my life the way I want to live it. And I really don't think I need anything other than having my meds figured out. And and you look at a situation like that, he's not in a place where he can get a job. And I think there's probably thousands of people on the street just like him. You can't, if you got MRSA all over your body, nobody's going to hire you because you can that's contagious. And with coronavirus, people are more reluctant to hire people who look homeless or sketchy, I'm sure, than ever before. So
we throw people away. We throw them away.
Yeah, it's just really sad. But shifting gears a bit, looking at the Black Lives Matter movement as a national trend, I'm starting to hear that they might become a political party, that they are getting a lot of funding. There were full-page ads run in the Salt Lake Tribune for a couple of weeks with all of these corporations now backing Black Lives Matter. And what I'm trying to wrap my head around, and I'm sure a lot of other people are, is the differing messages that are coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement. Burgess Owens, who's now running for Congress against Ben McAdams, says it's a Marxist organization. And I really cannot wrap my head around what it is exactly the Black Lives Matter is after, what their objectives are. Are they going to become a political party? Can you help us navigate what it is that's actually going on?
Yes. I don't see eye to eye with Mr. Owens. That's full disclosure. Okay. Black Lives Matter as an organization, they have several chapters around the country, and not every chapter is part of the global Black Lives Matter network itself. There are local chapters, and Utah has 2 and will soon have 3 that are Black Lives Matter I would say chapters, but not necessarily affiliated with the global Black Lives Matter um, organization.
Okay. So
Yes,
the global Black Lives Matter organization is basically receiving quite a lot of funding to
gotcha.
hold key protests in bigger sized cities, and the biggest cities really are affiliated with that organization, but the smaller cities are not. Is that explain it?
No, no, not necessarily. They are 501c3, just like many organizations. If a local chapter goes through the process of becoming an official affiliate, then they will become a nonprofit. That's how it works. I mean, they put in their legal papers and they become an official 501c3. That's a legal organization. Not every chapter does that. When Black Lives Matter was formed, that was intentional. They did not want a hierarchy because they view that hierarchy as part of a patriarchal structure. And they did not want to be affiliated with that. So they didn't. So when you think about, there are people who were part of that original movement that started out as a hashtag. There were people that are part of that original movement that have views that may differ, may be similar to other people that can support the meaning of Black Lives Matter, even if they don't necessarily support the organization of Black Lives Matter. They're two totally different things. And it just is. The organization Black Lives Matter, they do help form protests and bring awareness to issues, and I'm sure they have it highlighted on their website. But every local affiliate will not be similar, and that was by design. And every person that is a part of the Black Lives Matter movement may not necessarily feel the same way as the actual organization, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and
Okay.
we've been talking about in the past the 1619 project, and
Yes.
its sort of overlap with the Black Lives Matter, in that we need to knock down and tear apart the racist attributes that our country was founded upon. That's their message, not mine. Is that a key tenet in Black Lives Matter, in the national or international movement, that America is inherently a racist country?
America, the foundation of this country, of when it was founded, well, when it was founded in 1776, there were slaves. Um, when the Constitution was written, it was written in such a way that it provided freedom for everyone except slaves. So if you want to say, is the foundation of this country racist, then you're going to have to answer that question with a yes. It is. You have to tear down that the racist structure which this country was founded. It was intentional. Yes, many of the framers of the Constitution, from George Washington to Thomas Jefferson, owned slaves. That is a fact.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason why they left the slaves out when they were forming the Constitution was to get the Constitution ratified by the southern colonies that had slaves, a predominantly slaves. Now, slaves were in the northern colonies as well, but because the South was more agriculture, they had more of the slaves, and so slavery was a huge part of the economics of the South. So these are facts. It cannot be disputed.
Mm-hmm.
1619 is when the first slaves, 20-something odd slaves, came from Angola on a Dutch ship, landed in a Virginia colony. Those are facts.
Mm-hmm.
So those things cannot be disputed. And
But
so
I
if
mean,
you want,
is
yes,
America inherently racist today? I mean, I totally
yes,
agree with you,
yes.
but
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I am on a commission for racial equity in policing. Now, if you think about policing, how did policing even get started in this country? You have to know that to understand exactly why we have systemic racism in policing. Policing started as slave catchers.
Well,
That's how it got started. So that is inherently racist.
well,
So when you
policing
have
started because people had to be kept safe. I mean, it wasn't only slave catching.
no,
Policing
no,
was
policing
in
started,
places where anybody
no,
who was concerned about their safety needed policing.
no,
No?
no, no,
So it
no,
was only
no,
slave
I'm sorry,
catching, right
no.
from the get-go, it was just slave catching?
Right from the get-go, policing started as slave catchers. You can study that. It started as slave catchers. They went out and to catch the slaves
So
that
I mean,
ran
I
away.
just have to disagree with you. When the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock, they weren't out to start policing to catch slaves. It was like I just don't think that's accurate.
You can research that.
Okay, I'll have to do that, and
Yeah, yeah,
I'll have
yeah,
to agree to disagree.
yeah.
Um,
And then you can study the black codes, which are also known as black laws. What that occurred after slavery, but they still needed the economy to work. And how we got the reason why we got black laws and black laws and black code is basically is what's incorporated in our criminal justice system in our prisons right now, especially private prisons, because you still needed that free. Many of the corporations still needed that free labor that they could no longer get from slavery. So, and especially in the South, they arrested, let's just say, jaywalkers, put them in jail, and that's how corporations got free labor, and that's still happening today.
well, not they're not slaves, and they're not.
Then,
It's
well,
not free
that's not
labor.
well. You have in the Constitution the 13th Amendment, and there actually will be a resolution in Utah's on Utah's ballot this year to take slavery out of the Utah Constitution. But in the United States Constitution, if you read the 13th Amendment, the ratification, I mean, they didn't necessarily eradicate slavery. Because you can have slavery if the person had committed a crime. That is what's incorporated in our criminal justice system right now. And there's a movement happening nationally to amend the U.S. Constitution to get rid of the latter part of the 13th Amendment, which allows this. So it is still happening, and it is called slavery. When you have incarcerated people working maybe for pennies, maybe being paid, maybe not being paid, but performing tasks for corporations, that's slavery.
Okay, I'll have to look into that. So you're saying that under the 13th Amendment, there's a provision that still allows corporations to use the labor of
Yes.
incarcerated individuals?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I have not heard of that, and I will look into it.
I wrote about it actually on my blog. You can go to darlenemcdonald.com as well. When I wrote about Juneteenth, I wrote a big article about it.
So
but
Walmart could hire incarcerated people to make products for them.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. And one of the big ones is right here in Utah. And they talk about it quite a bit. It's on my blog. I encourage you to check out my blog. It's the latest one on Juneteenth.
And you have examples of this happening? in the
Oh
United
yeah,
States?
private
I mean,
prisons is
I
a
know
big
that
example.
prisons make our license plates. Prisoners will make our license plates, and
And
there's
they
all sorts
also
of like
make, yeah,
screen printing operations. Utah Zone is an organization. They said all of their shirts have to be printed at the prison because they're using that labor, and they have to give them the contract. And I know examples such as that.
it's
But
a
I'll have to
billion
look into
dollar
that. That I
industry.
did not know that.
Yeah.
But I I want to just kind of take a step back and like look at the bigger picture.
Mhm.
If you look at the opportunity available in the United States to all ethnic minorities, and you look at the middle class of America, and the majority of people with black skin, they're in the middle class. I mean, the majority of people who are ethnic minorities have the ability to climb the socioeconomic ladder and achieve a level of wealth and dignity that you just simply cannot achieve in other countries. Would you deny that?
Yes.
I struggle to understand how you could deny that. I mean, what other countries offer more opportunity for immigrants, especially refugees, to come and have a good quality of life?
You know, United States, there's a lot of opportunities afforded us in the United States that may not be afforded in other countries. Even Barack Obama said that his story may not have happened anyplace else. At the same time, you cannot deny the systemic racism within our institutions, within our financial institutions. We already discussed our criminal and policing institutions, also in our education institutions, and also in our electoral institution as well. And I can give you some examples. Our
Yeah, I
financial
that's what I like.
institutions,
I like examples.
yes, yes,
Blanket
our
statements like that I
financial,
don't like, but examples I will really appreciate.
absolutely, financial institutions. And this is documented. This is not Darlene talking out of her behind. This is documented. There are many studies that have been done that have proven that that African Americans, people of color, are charged higher interest rates when they go buy homes, when they go buy cars. They are charged a higher interest rate just walking onto the lot. Those are those are systemic racism that's happening in our financial institutions.
And you're
So
saying that happens specifically to black people or Latinos or ethnic minorities across the board, or what's the claim there, and what's the data that back that up?
when this study was conducted, when I taken my economics class at Westminster College, it is my understanding that it was happening to African Americans. I'm sure that the study has been expanded to include Latinx people as well. When we recently had in 2007, the economic class of 2007, that would be another perfect example. The housing crisis that came out of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
The minority community, the Black and Hispanic community, were predominantly impacted by the housing collapse.
I
Why
definitely
is
agree with
that?
you there. But
Yes,
but
they were
that's
the ones.
because they really opened up the amount of lending they were giving to people of all lower economic status. I mean,
No, that's not what happened at
well, you
all.
have
No.
subprime loans. Subprime loans were given out to a lot of people, white people across the board, and the
Yes,
subprime loan
however,
crisis
yes,
happened due to
however,
subprime loans. It's
yes, however, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but this is something I studied tremendously. So I'm
I mean,
sorry, I
I
apologize.
definitely like to
I
get
apologize for
get
interrupting
your
you.
take on it and listen to you on this, but
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting you.
no, you're good.
First of all, um, the the subprime mortgages, basically, you had bankers that were betting on people failing, and they gave these loans to people who should not have received these loans with these variable interest rates, and they were not going to be able to afford. Most of those loans went to people of color.
Mhm.
And even if they had the same credit or income as white people,
Mhm.
and that's a fact that has been shown as well. They have done interviews with people with. I remember one that's top
Okay,
of mind right now. I can see
sorry,
this woman in my
let's just
head.
back up a little bit.
Yeah,
You're saying that that it was a problem with bankers giving loans to subprime candidates, and the majority of which were people of color.
they gave the lenders,
Mm-hmm.
even when people did not need the subprime mortgages, even if they afford it, should have received regular low interest rate mortgages.
Oh, you're saying they were
They
classified as
showed up with,
subprime.
yeah, when they showed up at the closing, they still gave them these subprime mortgages without they found out once they showed up at the closing. They had not known prior to that. And I can still see the interview in my head of one African American woman that this happened to. She had the credit, she had the down payment, she had everything. There was absolutely no reason whatsoever for them to have done that to her. At the same time, when you show up at the closing, right, you bought in. You bought into the house. You bought into the emotional aspect of it. You're not exactly going to walk away, even though you probably should have, and people will probably say, well, she should have just got up and walked away. Not easier said than done.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened to many of them, many of them. Those communities, many of those communities, those Black and brown communities were decimated as
Yeah.
a result of those subprime mortgages.
Yeah, I
Decimated.
don't disagree at all with you there. I think that what caused it was anybody and everybody who wanted to buy a home or a property at that time was basically given the ability to do it. And they were charged, like you said, crazy high interest rates, some of them. And but I would like to see if you've got it, the data that speaks to it happened more to people of color across the board with the same credit, with all the other same job characteristics and everything else as white people, because I have not seen that data and
Yeah,
that we're
it's there.
seen those
It's
studies.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But back to the point of Black people or people of color or ethnic minorities perhaps having less opportunity in America under the framework and under the foundation we have here. I mean, would you say that they have more opportunity in a place like Canada or Mexico or Europe? Or, I mean, where on earth
It's
can you have more opportunity as an ethnic minority?
I'm gonna say we have opportunity. As a Black woman, I have opportunities. We teach our children that the opportunities are there for you to succeed. I'm not going to say it's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
We also teach our children that you're going to have to try harder and be harder. It's not okay to just be good. You have to be the best. It's not okay to just be average.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be better. Barack Obama became Barack Obama because he was above average.
Mm-hmm.
The average person would never have become Barack Obama. He had to be better. He had to be the better orator.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that correctly. Harvard grad, lawyer. I mean, he
well,
wasn't
I
just
think
enough.
a lot of people know
Yeah.
his background, but what's your background?
Yeah.
I really.
But the point that I'm getting at
Mm-hmm.
is just being good is not enough for many African Americans. Just being average is not enough. Mm-hmm. So yes, we have the opportunity to get ahead here as many places as well, but just being good is not enough. There is systemic racism that prevents that from happening. It's there. We have our education system. It current right now with COVID-19. We know that communities of color are disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Why? Because many of them are frontline workers. Many of them don't have health care, and you have people who are fighting having universal health care or even having employers provide health care to their employees. And then you want to cut Medicaid or Medicare so that people can even get health care. Yeah. So you have people that are impacted by that. You also have what's happening with our electoral system. When people have to stand in line for 5 hours to vote, that is especially in communities of color where this occurs. Then you have systemic racism in our electoral system. And let's even talk about how we even got the
I won't argue for a second that everything is fair and everything in every community is good and equal and right. But what I just like to finish on the point of opportunity, because obviously the goal is to have more equality of opportunity for everybody. And that comes down to education. It comes down to schools being better, schools equipping the students who graduate with what they need to succeed. And if we don't have the ability to give the students a proper education, then they can't go into the workforce and they can't succeed. And so I look at what happens in a lot of inner cities, and they pump more and more money into the bigger failing programs, and it seems like money isn't making the difference. And there's a study done by the Brookings Institution where they found that the criteria that matters the most in terms of your success as an individual when you get out into the workforce is first of all, you need to graduate from high school. You need to not have kids out of wedlock, and you need to.
Whoa! Wait a minute. Who said that?
This is a study done by the Brookings Institute on what are the criteria that are going to ensure that you're able to be above the minimum poverty line in this country, and if you basically just don't have kids out of wedlock, you graduate high school, and you don't have kids before the age of 25. Those criteria are what are going to matter more than race, ethnicity, or where you grew up. And
I haven't seen the out of wedlock thing. I will have to look at that. I don't disagree with the education piece of it. I have not seen or heard anything about the out of wedlock part being a factor in that.
We'll link to it in this video. I referred to it a couple of times because it's across the board. It's actually not. It's not racial discriminatory. It's basically, if you're a white person, you're just as likely to live in poverty if you don't do those things than if you're a black person. And as far as equality of opportunity goes, I've always been a proponent of school choice. I really strongly believe the worst schools should just go out of business. They should just close their doors so it can give students the choice to go where they want to be schooled. And that's something obviously the teacher unions have been opposed to, but that was one of the first major stories we did here at Utah Stories, and I don't see what could possibly be the downside of giving teachers or parents and students the choice of where they go to school.
Because you end up leaving out many students, and the people who goes to the better schools will most likely be the ones from the better neighborhoods. So your school choice program leaves out a lot of
But
people.
If you're in a bad area and you just choose to go to a better school and the school in your neighborhood goes out of business, the school that's succeeding could open another school up in the bad area, and then you have a better framework.
Okay, then what does that do for the other communities? Do they just give up? You cannot put every child bus them into a Federal Heights area. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So the school choice only benefit the people who can actually get in there, and it most likely will leave behind everyone else, and everyone else would probably be people who look like me. So that's the reason why the school choice just doesn't work. It's not realistic. It may help one or two people who look like me, but the vast majority will be left out. So it's rather than busing everyone out of those neighborhoods and moving them into a neighborhood that they may or may not ever live in, why not improve the schools that are in all neighborhoods so that everyone have the same, not only access to really good education, but also can stay closer to home so that they're not having to bus an hour away or having to travel an hour one way to go to a school out of their district, out even away from home. Why? So,
I just think you leave it up to the free market and the choice of parents and students of where they go to school, and then you have the opportunity to just say, all right, school, if nobody wants to go to your school and you're not getting the students who want to attend there because the kids are failing, you can close your doors or go out of business, or a new charter school model can open up in your building that's a better model. But anyway, that's a whole other can of worms we could open up. And we were talking about Black Lives Matter and opportunity, and that's kind of the framework that I'm interested in this conversation in, because I absolutely agree we need to increase the amount of opportunity that's available, especially of those for people of color, ethnic minorities, everybody who's at the lowest end, because it's clear the gap between the rich and the poor is widening. And one thing we're not seeing a proper addressing of is, why is that gap continually increasing? Why are the rich growing richer? Why are the poor remaining stagnant? And why are more people not bridging that gap? And I'd kind of like to know your story. This is Utah Stories. We always like to tell individual stories of success. Where did you come from, and how did you end up in Utah?
I was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I jumped in my car and drove down I-80, and I ended up in Utah. But
that's pretty cool. You just broke down, probably.
Actually,
you did it by choice.
I actually came here by choice.
That's cool.
I was born and raised in the Midwest, but I never really felt like I was a Midwesterner. And I love the mountains. I don't get into the mountains as often as I would like now, but I love the mountains. They are very majestic and beautiful up close and when you're in them. And that's why I moved here. I wanted to expose my children to the outdoors. It's something that's not necessarily afforded to them the way that I wanted it to be, living in the Midwest. And so we literally jumped in the car and went down I-80, and here we are.
How long ago was that?
2002.
Oh, wow. So you've been here for a while.
Yeah.
That's great. And so what do you do for your job?
So I am a senior product support analyst. So I've been in technology now basically ever since I graduated from high school. Mm-hmm. I kind of fell into it right out of high school, got very lucky, and started off, doing data entry, did some data entry with the Internal Revenue Service, and got into the private sector and just advanced from there. And I got lucky. I got lucky that I fell into computers. I can't necessarily say, I can't necessarily say it's what I thought I was going to be when I grew up, but it is one way that has afforded me the lifestyle that I enjoy in my family, and served me well when I was a single mom as well. Mm-hmm. So it worked out really well for me and my family.
And I read on your blog you vacation in places like Europe, and you love to travel, and you're a very good writer. I enjoyed reading your blog. I always appreciate good writing as a magazine publisher. And
thank you very much. Yeah, writing is my passion. Definitely my passion.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And so I just look at you and your story and what you've done, And why can't your model be replicated across the? I mean, you probably weren't. Were you raised a middle class, affluent? How were you raised?
You know, my father from the South, my parents from the South, my father always worked two or three jobs. There were 6 kids, and my father made $56 a week.
Wow.
When I was born, I was child number 6, and hopefully I don't get emotional on this. But when I was born, it was 19. I'm not gonna tell my age, but my father had to go to his boss and tell his boss that he needed to make $50 more a week because he needed to buy a house to put his kids in. Because nobody would rent to him because he had too many kids. He could only have 4 kids. And he's like, well, what am I supposed to do with the other 2? And keep in mind, this was in the 60s. And he couldn't just move to any neighborhood. So his boss gave him the $50 more so that he can put his kids into a house in Cincinnati, Ohio. So we moved into the house that I was raised in. We moved into that house, and we lived there pretty much. I lived there my entire life. Mm-hmm. And always worked 2 jobs, worked hard, but we were poor, and I would never have known that we were poor. Never have known that we were poor. We always got what we needed and sometimes what we wanted. We didn't have the best, but we had enough. We were full. And that was a great way to be. Mm-hmm. My drive comes from that. My parents were functionally illiterate for most of my life. They learned to read by reading the Bible. That's how many African Americans learned how to read, is by learning to read the Bible. My father is a Pentecostal minister, and education was important to him. He was uneducated himself, same as my mother. My mother had my brother when she was very young. They got married when they were 16 and 18. So it was, wow. It was a different time. And education was the way out of poverty in their minds. And that exists today. Mm-hmm. But getting out of generational poverty is not an easy feat for many people. I was different. I was different. Mm-hmm. And I can't say to people, just follow my lead. I can't do that. What I can do is just be an example for people and maybe be a mentor for some other people. But circumstances such as poverty and generational poverty especially is really hard to beat back and to break yourself free of, because it sits right next to you everywhere you go. Mm-hmm. And the only way to break free of it is to just not sit with it. And you find a way to sit someplace else. And you find yourself being very, very lonely. And that isn't for everyone. Yeah. It's just not for everyone. It's hard to give up your family and your friends when it's hard to give up your family and friends, period. It's just hard. So it's not a just follow me type of thing. You can be an example, and as Quakers say, you let your life speak so that others may follow. Mm-hmm. You don't necessarily go proselytize to people, but you let your life speak, and then hopefully they can follow, and then you live your life accordingly so that others would want to follow. That is how you do it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I appreciate you coming on, Darlene. It's been great having you. So,
Thank you for having me, and yeah, thank you for
yeah,
the back and forth too.
yeah,
Sorry, I got.
I mean, I'm not afraid of these hot button issues. I think we find commonality always. It's like obviously there's a lot of tension and contention on these issues, but why can't we just talk about them? I mean, obviously everyone carries around their own lens, and as long as we're willing to listen to each other, I think we always find common ground. And so that's what this show's all about. So I thank everybody for watching and listening. And thanks very much, Darlene, for coming on the program.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you.
tell everybody how to go visit your blog and read what you've written.
Absolutely. You go to darlenemcdonald.com, and there's a spot there that says blog. Click on blog.
Yeah, go check it out. It's a really interesting site, and I like how you say you read because you write because that's what you do and that's what you need to do. I feel the same way. I have to write. It's part of existence. So, all right, and thank you everyone for joining us. If you'd like to follow the Utah Stories show, you can do so on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Of course, YouTube. We've really enjoyed getting comments from everybody on the program. And the best way to find out what we're doing in upcoming shows and episodes is go to utahstories.com and subscribe to the channel through our newsletter. That's what we send out every single week when we have new episodes coming out. And I have one last sponsor to tell you about. The lakes are open, and you need to go out and enjoy them with a jet ski or boat from from Action Toy Rental. You can rent 2 jet skis for as low as $277 per day. You can take your friends and family out to the lake and enjoy a set of Yamahas and pull someone on a tube, wakeboard, or water skis. Book them online using coupon code UT2020 and save an additional $40. Action Toy Rental is Utah's jet ski rental company. They have 5-star reviews, and they're super awesome. Go to actiontoyrental.com and use that coupon code UT2020. All right, thank you everyone for watching. I'll see you next time.